Anxiety! Welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing my January 2022 wrap-up. I'm actually really excited about the books that I was able to finish this month. I wasn't able to complete the entire TBR that I had for myself, but that's kind of part of life on my channel. I always have really over-ambitious TBRs, and I do what I can with them. But I think I did pretty good last month. I read a bunch of different genres, and I found some new, all-time favorites. So I've just been having a really good reading time the last couple months, and that continued into the new year. The first book I'm going to talk about is a sequel to a book that I read in December of last year, and that is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe. The first book in the series is behind me here, Before the Coffee Gets Cold. So I gave the first book, I think, 4 stars, and the second book I ended up giving 3 stars, or 3.5 stars. Now, for me, a 3 or 3.5 star rating is not a bad rating. It's a book that I genuinely enjoyed. I might have had a couple, issues with it, or something didn't feel exactly right, but it's not a bad rating at all. And so this book follows the same kind of pattern as the first book, which is that there is this, underground coffee shop in Tokyo, I believe, where if you sit in a specific chair and get poured coffee by a specific person, you can go back in time. There are a lot of rules associated with this, which you'll find out through reading the series, but the main rule is that you have to come back to the present before the coffee gets cold. Something that I talked about with the first book is that Japanese literature has a very different feel from Western literature, which isn't necessarily surprising, but I think I'm finally starting to put my finger on what that is. And it's that Japanese literature focuses on explaining things as they are, and the beauty of things as they currently exist in the world. Not moralizing things per se, not talking about what you should do or what the author thinks about a situation. It's just describing it as it is. Now, this may seem like something that's very not inspiring, not super interesting, but there's a beautiful simplicity to this type of writing, and I'm really starting to appreciate that. This book is very much connected to the first book, so we follow a lot of the same characters. We start to learn about some not secret, but we start to have some plot twists with who is related to who and how so, and some questions from the first book do get answered. So this is one that I would definitely recommend picking up if you like the first book. I think it adds a lot of depth to the series in general. But it does have kind of a dry feel to it, like this happened and then this happened. I think the author was a playwright, I'm pretty sure, before he actually... Yeah, so he produced, directed, and wrote for a theatrical group, it says here, a Sonic Snail, before he wrote this. And it definitely has the feeling of kind of stage direction, not necessarily prose. So the reading can be a little stop and start. Doesn't really have much of a flow to it, but the content is quite beautiful. And I really love how Kawaguchi explores what people might do if they had this chance, if they were put in this situation, and it's just very human. This whole book is very, very human. So I would definitely recommend it. It wasn't a favorite of mine, but I'm glad that I have it on my shelves. The next book I read was Holy Sister, the third book in the Book of the Ancestor. So this series was one that I was super hyped for when I started it. It just sounds like everything I'd love. A grimdark world with a young girl who is taken in by a monastery and trained to be an assassin nun. Just, I was so ready for this series. As this is the third book in a series, I can't go into the plot, much at all, but unfortunately, the issues that I had with the first book, which were the relationships between the young female characters at the school, the way that friendships and rivalries were created, those problems create ripple effects throughout the entire series, and they become linchpin points in this book that are huge plot points, and because I wasn't invested or didn't quite believe in those situations at their like inception, they didn't really pay off for me in this book. So the first book I believe is 4 stars, the second one was 3.5, and this one was 3 stars. Unlike most epic fantasy, the books get shorter as they go along, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But in this case, I think that the bare bones kind of nature of it was a little bit of an issue. A lot of the world building I was hoping to get, the answers I was hoping to get, we don't get here. So I just found it disappointing, I guess. Maybe this should have been in my disappointing video. I did put the first book in that actually, but I would say the third book is like closer. I'm gonna hit myself in the face with that. I would say the third book is you know, more disappointing in that regard, that I was hoping that it would give me some answers and maybe bump this series up higher. Overall, I like the individual characters. Sister Kettle is just, I would die for her. But that alone cannot carry a story. Things that are done really well in the series continue to be done really well in this book. So the fight scenes are just fantastic, as I'd mentioned before. Just, chef's kiss beautiful. The poison lore and the way that assassins carry out their work is so detailed and well-researched and amazing. But when you come out of like the micro scale and go to the macro scale of, like I said, relationships between characters, world building, it doesn't deliver. So this book ended up being a 3 stars. I'm happy I read the series, and I will continue at least onto The Girl in the Stars because I own it, but this isn't like a must read for me. However, this next book, I loved it so much, and it is a must read, must own for me, and that is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is my first John Gwynne novel. I have no idea why, but I just felt no desire to read the Malice series. I really couldn't tell you why. It just never pulled me in. But this cover, and then my obsession with meddling gods, I've mentioned it in almost every video. You all know this is the vibe I'm feeling recently. This book takes that to the extreme. I love it so much. This is a very, very brutal, grimdark world based on Norse mythology and kind of like Viking culture. And it is so well researched. You can tell that John Gwynne just put his heart and soul into the research and the love of this history that he's put into his book. It really shows through the pages. The character work is amazing, and the plot twists at the end, how it all comes together, just yes. And the god depicted on this cover is completely consistent with the massiveness of the gods and the lore in this world. Like there's an entire city encapsulated inside the skull of a giant snake god. Like I could have delved into like chapters learning about that city. We only get glimpses here and there, but I feel like we'll be back there in the future. But just these really unique settings of places that are really interwoven and interconnected with the lore of this world. I loved it. I loved every page of this book. In this book, we follow 3 main perspectives: Orca, Elvar, and Varg. So Orca is this mother who through some circumstances ends up going on a revenge quest. She's badass and I love her. Then we have Elvar, who is part of a band of, I guess you can say a warrior band, basically a group of raiders who trade in slaves and in treasure, and they just basically go anywhere where profit is to be had, take it, and make more money from it. And then we have Varg, who is a previous slave, and we follow him as he's just gotten free. We don't know why, we don't know how, but he is trying to join another band, like a warrior band, that is more for hire, not necessarily doing what they so please, but is hired for very expensive and exorbitant prices to do what others ask them to do. And all of these plot threads come together in the end, like I mentioned, in just an amazing way. So I loved this book. I cannot wait to read the second one. I will be buying it and having it on my shelves. But for now, I will just proudly display this one. Clearly, this book was 5 stars. The next book I read was Neon Gods, and this book was recommended to me through the Secret Santa kind of, not exchange, but recommendation game that we did at the Only Good Book Club. So all of us pulled someone from the book club at random and recommended them a book. And Shamla recommended to me Neon Gods. And I really enjoyed this book. I do enjoy smut. I do enjoy romance books. I just don't tend to pick them up for myself. So I'm actually really glad that she recommended this one to me. I enjoyed it. The world building was a goddamn mess, but that's not why we're reading the book, right? We're reading the book for the smut and the characters, and both of those were done really well. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling, as an adult romance, and it was really fun to read. I sped through it, and I do plan on reading the second book in the series, which I do think was just recently released. So I do plan to pick that up at some point in the near future. Next, I read Where the Drowned Girls Go by Seanan McGuire. This is the 8th. Editing Taylor, change that on the screen if I need to, but I believe 8th book in the Wayward Children series. Seanan McGuire releases a novella for the series every year in January, and this installment was supposed to explore, or did explore, the other school in this world. So if you don't know, this series of novellas starts with Every Heart a Doorway, and that book follows a specific school that is created for kids who go through a hidden door. So a Narnia-esque door hidden in a wardrobe, a closet, a chest, in a tree, and children who go through these doors and enter worlds that are calling to them for one reason or another. And then again, for one reason or another, they end up having to come back to our world from that world. And they have to adjust to being back into this world. So that adjustment period can be very difficult. No one really believes them or understands what they've gone through. So there's a specific school that these kids can go to, and that school is introduced and talked about in the first book, which is Every Heart a Doorway. Then each successive novella follows different characters and their different worlds and their journeys, through recovery or just through maybe finding their door again. So this latest installment focused on another school that takes a very different approach to helping these kids. It's not quite as fun of a place as the one we've been introduced to thus far. I did enjoy this book. I've mentioned in the last couple reviews I've done for this series that the last few installments have missed some pinch of magic that was there in the first couple. So that again was an issue here. I think part of it could be that we don't necessarily go through a door in this installment. We stay in this world and kind of deal with the consequences of that. And I do think that this novella had a different goal than other ones in the past, and that's fine. So I did enjoy it, but it didn't grab me like the others did. So I think on Goodreads I gave this 4 stars, but if I'm being honest, it might be more of a 3.5, rounded up to 4 on Goodreads. I did enjoy it. I always listen to these via audiobook and just take a walk and listen to them. They're very short, and it did have that transformative property that a lot of them do, but I don't know, it didn't blow me away like the beginning parts of this series did. But because they're such quick reads and they're still enjoyable, I will be continuing on with the series probably for as long as McGuire releases them. The next book I read was Guns, An American Conversation. So this book was actually gifted to me by my parents because they know me really well. I am the type of person who likes to read about different perspectives about a specific issue, even if I have my own opinion, which I think most people do, most issues. I like to hear what other people have to say. So this is a very short book, and honestly, I think it should have been longer. I ended up giving this 4 stars, but this book basically just, compiles. It compiles the results and a couple examples of this workshop, not experimenting, yeah, I would say workshop, that this company, Spaceship Media, completed. So Spaceship Media is a company that practices what they term dialogue journalism, where people who are journalists work in tandem with normal citizens, normal people, to create a space for dialogue. for a set period of time. So in this case, they created a face-to-face meetup for people from all sides of the gun conversation that lasted for a week, that they were the monitors and the moderators of during that time. And then after that, they opened it up to a wider group of people in a Facebook group. And staff from Spaceship Media acted as moderators throughout this entire month-long period, making sure that people were having constructive conversations, even though some of them got heated and a little bit of fighting was expected and not really a problem, making sure that those conversations were going towards a constructive goal of understanding. So it was a very tough job for the people that work at Spaceship Media. They made that very clear. And I'm very interested in this company now, but this book itself did not include enough of the actual quotes of the people in the group. It was more about the goal of the group, with a couple examples that were supposed to exemplify different sides of the story. And I understand if you wanted to keep it short, that's fine, but I wanted to read more actual quotations from people. So that's why this book didn't get a full 5 stars. I'm someone who feels like they're quite middle of the road when it comes to the gun debate in America. I don't really have super strong opinions on one side or the other, although I definitely have opinions. It's not a very sensitive subject for me. However, I'd be lying if I said that there weren't some opinions in here that pissed me off or like suddenly like brought up my hackles. So I do think that it was good to engage with the arguments in here, whether I agree with them or not. In many cases I don't. I think it was good to see those and engage with those. And then the end of this book does have a very extensive and well-researched further reading section that I have marked up. A lot of my tabs are from that end section for further reading and things that I want to check out. So I do think that this book is worth reading. I don't think that it's got enough like meat to it to warrant a 5 stars, but I did enjoy reading this and seeing different perspectives. Once I say the title of this next book, I think you guys can guess what my rating is going to be, but that is The Veiled Throne by Ken Liu. This is the 3rd book in the Dandelion Dynasty series, which I have talked about for the last couple of months on my channel ever since I started reading them. I am in love with them. They are they've shot up, this series, whole series has shot up to one of my top series ever in epic fantasy, and I'm just in love with it. So I can't go into detail as it's a 3rd book, but I do think that this particular installment might lose some readers in the way that the first half and the second half of the book are constructed. The first half of the book is much more what you would expect from the previous books, and the second half of the book goes on what some people might view as a tangent, and understandably so, going into like specifically food culture in this world. But I do think that it serves a purpose in establishing character growth in some very specific characters, and showing the idea of how culture, how it changes, how it moves over time, how it sinks into your bones and who you are, and how those things are constantly at a push and pull, especially if you go between 2 different cultures. And just the joy of food also. As someone who owns a restaurant with my husband, my life has a lot to do with food, and it was kind of like a love letter to food culture from Ken Liu in the second half of this book, and I just really enjoyed it. So I can see why some people might be thrown off on the pace of this 3rd installment, but for me personally, it clicked. To just give you a summary about what the series is about, like overall, but as with really large fantasy epics, you know, this summary doesn't necessarily, things change. Let's put it that way. Things change throughout the series. But in the first book, The Grace of Kings, you're following 2 main characters who, there's this very overbearing emperor at the time, and his reign is not good for the common people. So you follow 2 main characters who have 2 different views as to how to deal with this, and 2 main characters arguably, but there are a lot of characters in this cast, like lots of them. But the little actions and the choices that every character makes has a large bearing on what happens to this empire that has existed for a long time. So that's kind of the first book. I think is a pretty good summary of it. It's amazing. The series is very detailed. Ken Liu just, I don't know, lets us indulge in the beauty and every detail of this world, and I love it. If you don't like slow-paced books, these are not for you, but I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. And Speaking Bones is coming out this year, and I can't wait. It can't come fast enough. It can't come fast enough. This book was 5 stars. Of course. No one's shocked. This next book is also one that I loved, and that is Gunmetal Gods by Zamil Akhtar. This is a self-published book that is the first in a series, and I was just blown away by how much I enjoyed this entire story. I recently took part in a live over on Steve Talks Books channel with Lana from Lore and Lullabies, as well as P.L. Stewart, who is an indie self-pub author himself of the series The Drowned Kingdom. And all of us gathered together to talk to Zamil Akhtar himself about his series. This book, guys, was so good. Zamil Akhtar has been very open about the fact that the thing that inspired this book is what if Game of Thrones took place in a Middle Eastern context. And oh my god, he completely succeeded in that. When I first picked this book up, my slow-paced, epic fantasy-loving heart kind of, I don't know, it felt like I missed a step on an escalator because the pace of this book was so fast, much faster than I was used to. And at first, I thought that that would really throw me off and that it wasn't going to be something that I enjoyed so much. But as I continued reading, it's kind of like reading a book, like an audiobook on like 2 times speed. When you first like ramp up from 1 time to 2 times, it feels a little jarring, but then once you get used to it, you can't imagine listening on another speed. It was just like that. So by the end of the book, I couldn't put the book down. I was obsessed with the characters, the themes of it. It was so good. This book follows 2 main perspectives, Kiva and Micah. Micah is a religious zealot who has become a conqueror, and he uses his religious faith as his sword, essentially. Well, actual swords as well. He's very brutal. And so he's this gray character that you follow who's doing horrific things for the goal of, you know, what he believes is good. And then you have Kiva, who is a washed up previous hero. So he was a hero when he was younger, went through a lot of trauma, went through a lot of experiences that maybe a lot of fantasy books might focus on, you know, the young hero coming up and saving the world. He's already done that, and he's dealing with the trauma of that and what he's left with. But then he gets summoned by his Shah to fight for his kingdom again. But he's kind of this washed up old fat guy now. And he doesn't really know what his place in this is. And so you follow both of these characters making good and bad decisions. And eventually these 2 characters, these 2 points of view will come together. And it's masterfully done. There's also the idea of meddling gods, which we know on this channel. I've talked about it so much in recent months, but this is just a vibe that I'm loving, and this book explores that so fully. There are meddling gods all over this, all over the pages, and it's so good. Like, the gods are not what you would expect in the best way. Please read this book. Please read this book. The last book that I read is The Picture of Dorian Gray. This is the first book in my classics challenge that I have for myself this year. This is a classic I've been wanting to pick up for a really long time. I ended up giving this book a 4 stars. I thought that the writing was beautiful, and I think that Oscar Wilde has this, I don't know, you can tell it's him writing. There's a very tangible aspect to his writing where you're like, ah, that's Oscar Wilde. He has a very unique sense of humor, and I love how the humor that was present when I read The Importance of Being Earnest. That was present in the beginning of this book, but as it gets darker and you start to fall into madness with Dorian Gray, the slow, disappearance of that humor is a really good pairing with the tone of this book. So I really enjoyed it. It didn't blow my mind, but I'm glad that I read it, and I definitely want to have a physical copy because some of the things that Lord Henry says in this book, like, I'm gonna have to sit down and think about them. still at this point, because they are definitely food for thought, and I need to tap the shit out of this book. A very quick honorable mention for this wrap-up is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. So I pulled this as part of my TBR game, where I'm pulling 2 books every month from my physical list of books that I have to read. So in the first month I pulled American Guns and American Conversation, and I pulled Moby Dick. So I did not finish this book in January. It is a chunker. So I did start it, and I plan to continue it in chunks over the next couple of months. So I don't plan to finish this in February, just because the font is tiny. It's a lot. It's a lot for a classic. So I don't plan to finish this in February, but I do plan to make progress every month until I completely finish this classic. I don't have basically any thoughts thus far because I haven't really gotten to the meat of the book whatsoever. So we'll see what my thoughts are in February. Concludes my January wrap-up. Let me know in the comments down below, as always, if you've read any of these books, if you think I should prioritize some over others, because just as usual, I have bitten off more than I can chew. So prioritization is pretty important in getting to the books that I want to. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. じゃあね